Welcome to E3 Rehab. I'm Dr. Mark Sertica, physical therapist. Today, I'm going to discuss how I train as a 31-year-old who has had a right total hip replacement for over 11 years now. As a quick disclaimer, how I train and what works for me might not be completely applicable to you, so it's important that you consult your surgeon or physical therapist before implementing any new exercises into your routine. This video does not include recommendations for higher impact exercises like running or jumping because they're not something that I include in my workouts, and I explain why in a previous video that I'll link in the description. Lastly, this video is a little more advanced, so if you're looking for simpler exercise progressions within your first year of having a total hip replacement, I made a really thorough video on that as well that I'll link below. I usually take a very generalized approach to my warm-up prior to training my legs. Personally, I like to take my hips through various ranges of motion to expose them to different stressors to hopefully increase my overall movement capacity and variability. I do want to emphasize that the goal here is not necessarily to significantly improve my range of motion, as that's fairly fixed by the design of the implant, and that's actually beneficial to protect it. So I'll set a timer on my phone for 10 one-minute rounds with 10-second breaks in between each round, and just continuously perform different movements. Here's an example warm-up. Minute 1, alternating reverse lunge with a twist. Minute 2, world's greatest stretch. Minute 3, lateral squats. Minutes 4 and 5, single leg RDL with the knee drive on the left and on the right. Minute 6, inchworms. Minutes 7 and 8, sitting up tall in the 90-90 position with the left leg in front and then the right leg in front. And I'm not great at this. And then minutes 9 and 10, quadruped toe taps on the left and on the right. I also have noticeable glute weakness and atrophy on the side of my total hip replacement because the surgery was done using a posterior approach, so sometimes I'll include some isolated glute exercises as part of that 10-minute warm-up or in addition to it. My 3 go-tos would probably be crab walks with a band around my knees, monster walks with a band around my knees, or single leg standing fire hydrant isometrics. And I'll basically do any one of those exercises for 3 sets to complete burnout. For a leg workout, I like to start with compound movements. I'll pick one exercise that is going to emphasize my quads and one that will emphasize my hamstrings. The most popular compound free weight exercise for the quads is the barbell back squat. However, I do not back squat anymore. I have in the past, but now instead, I perform different split squat variations, with my favorite being the rear foot elevated split squat. Why do I choose the split squat over the traditional squat? The main reason is that the degree of hip flexion required during a barbell squat does not feel good on my hip, and rather than my musculature being the limiting factor secondary to fatigue, it's pain that makes me discontinue the exercise. That's not what I want. On the other hand, it's much easier to manipulate torso position in a split squat, so it allows me to limit the degree of hip flexion needed and is therefore much more comfortable for me while eliciting similar adaptations. I also like the fact that it's a fairly unilateral exercise, since I did mention having some side-to-side differences in gluteal strength and muscle size. The most popular compound machine exercise for the quads would probably be the leg press. Similar to the barbell back squat, I'm not a huge fan of most leg presses for me because of that loaded hip flexion, but I am a big fan of hack squats as I can train my quads really well with minimal issues at my hip. The deadlift is easily the most popular compound free weight exercise for the hamstrings and posterior chain, and once again, I've done deadlifts in the past using relatively heavy weights, but it's not my preference anymore. If I'm going to do a hinging movement, I prefer a slow and controlled RDL. Single leg RDL or kettlebell swings can be a really nice option as well. Otherwise, I really like exercises that incorporate a bridge with a hamstring curl using sliders, a suspension trainer, or a ball because it keeps my hips in extension where there's no aggravation at all. I do want to mention that for exercises that load the hip joint, like the split squat or RDL, I generally perform sets of 8 repetitions or more because the higher rep ranges with relatively lighter weight feel much better than lower rep ranges at a relatively higher weight. So I'm still able to accomplish my fitness goals, there's just less discomfort involved. Machine-based isolation exercises have really helped me develop my legs because I only have occasional discomfort with weight-bearing exercises or exercises that load the joint in deep hip flexion. But I don't have any discomfort with the majority of isolation exercises. The primary example for the quads would be the seated leg extension, and for the hamstrings would be the prone or seated hamstring curl. Both exercises train the respective muscle groups effectively with zero limitation from the hip joint. Some examples for the hip would be seated hip adduction, seated hip abduction, and hip extension using a GHD or Roman chair. I can't go through every isolation exercise because there's too many options, but we do have a free exercise library categorized by muscles and movements, and you can always look around to see what exercises might work for you. My go-tos: seated leg extension, either hamstring curl variation, seated and standing calf raises, and the previously mentioned banded exercises for my hips. I don't do a lot of isolated core exercises, but if it's something that you enjoy, there's no shortage of options because the implant shouldn't really be a limiting factor here. You can always throw in 5 to 10 minutes of movements that also highly challenge the hip musculature. A really good example would be the side plank clamshell with a band around your knees. You can do this as an isometric by just holding the position at the top or performing for repetitions. It's a great way to challenge the trunk while strengthening hip abduction and external rotation. I really enjoy walking my dogs, hiking, and biking, and those are my main forms of cardio or conditioning, but there are really a lot of options that you can choose from and that can be done at a high intensity. Spin classes or bike sprints on your own, swimming, stair climber, elliptical, rowing machine, assault bike, battle ropes, sled pushes and pulls, ski ergometer, boxing classes, med ball slams and throws, and the list goes on. So don't think that just because you have a total hip replacement, you're going to be severely limited by what you can do. It's not true. You can do a lot and do it safely. Does everyone become completely pain-free after a total hip replacement? The research would suggest not. With day-to-day activities, I'm fairly asymptomatic. However, if I'm training pretty heavy with certain movements, I might have a little bit of discomfort from time to time, but it's not something that overly concerns me for a few reasons. Number one, even if you didn't have a total hip replacement, there's going to be times when you're training at a high intensity, push things a little too far and experience some discomfort, but that's normal regardless of the surgery or not. If you do too much, just do a little less the next time around. Number two, I've had this implant for over 11 years, so I've learned my boundaries and try to stay within them, and I know the exercises that don't mesh well with my hip and avoid or modify those exercises as needed. And that's why I'm making this video, so hopefully you can learn these things much sooner than I did. Number three, which builds off the last point, I always keep things tolerable. I no longer sacrifice my comfort for performance because it's just not worth it for me. With how I choose to train, I think the potential benefits outweigh the potential risks for my mental health, heart health, bone density, and all of the other amazing benefits that exercise offers. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, subscribe, and leave any questions or comments below. This is my third video on the topic, so check out the other two. There's also a massive blog on our website at e3rehab.com where I go into even more depth. If there's anything else that you want me to talk about, let me know. Maybe a Q&A? Peace.